So Imagine Dragons released their new album Origins last November, and I decided to make a video about it. I know I'm kind of late, but better late than never. So yeah, these are all 4 of the Imagine Dragons albums ranked. So Imagine Dragons has always been one of my favorite bands. Ever since I was in junior high, I just fell in love with their music. I just related to it and gravitated to it. And now they come out with like 4 albums, so now I feel like I have to rank them somehow. And I've also decided I'm not going to rank any of the EPs or anything, just like the 4 major albums that came out. I just want everyone to know that whatever I say in this video is just my critical opinion. If I say anything that seemed like it's being a shun, it's not. Imagine Dragons is one of my favorite bands, so I would never shun them. It's just there's some things that I'm critical about, which, you know, nobody's perfect. No band's perfect. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that before we even get to this video, so that way no one gets triggered. Okay, let's get into it. So at number 4 we have Evolve. Evolve to me was where Imagine Dragons started to take more of a mainstream approach and was trying to appeal to a broader audience, which isn't a bad thing, but sometimes when you do that you can lose a little bit of the substance and the deepness of your songs, and I think that shows a little bit in the album. Not to say it was a bad album, just saying that they lost a little bit of the deepness and a little bit of the metaphors and imagery. It was more concrete and took a more mainstream approach. I'm not a big fan of that, but it still wasn't a bad album. And hey, look, there were still songs that were deep and still had meaning. Songs like Next to Me, Believer, I'll Make It Up to You, even songs like Mouth of the River had good verses in it. You can find deepness every now and then in this album. It's just not so apparent like all their other albums. That's kind of why it's my least favorite. And that leads me to my number 3 pick, which is their newest album, Origins. Origins to me was a big step up from Evolve. It still wasn't quite what I wanted, but man, there was still some good songs on here. This album is kind of like if Evolve and Night Visions had like a baby, and this would be the result. To me, this is like their old stuff collabing with their new stuff, and it kind of works in some regards. It still kind of loses substance here and there and the deepness like with Evolve, but there are some better songs, more true honest songs I think on this album than Evolve. Songs like West Coast, Bad Liar, even Zero took me a while to really kind of like. There are some good things in there. I feel like Dan's being really honest, and I think that's important. There was a great song on here that really reminded me of their old style, which was Real Life. It was the last song on the album, and man, that reminded me of old school Imagine Dragons. So yeah, this album kind of gives me hope that they'll go back to their roots, you know? No pun intended. So now we're finally at my number 2 pick, which I've been waiting for. This is honestly one of my favorite albums I ever listened to. It was actually the first album I ever got into, like a full album. And that's my number 2 pick, which is Night Visions. Man, what an album. Like, this album has so many varieties and sounds and just different themes all throughout. This album has incredible lyrics, a lot of drums, and not to mention just tons of emotion from the lead singer Dan Reynolds. I honestly think this is the album where you really get to see kind of who Dan is as a person and how he deals with struggles and difficulties in his life. And it feels like this album is where Imagine Dragons truly begins. I know there's EPs and all that kind of stuff, but this album to me kind of felt like more their stamp identity as an album, as their first album. And man, just to mention some of my personal favorites like Celine, Amsterdam, Is Time, Nothing Left to Say, Demons. Like, this album to me it probably has the most of my favorite songs on it. Okay, so now you're probably wondering, why is Night Vision my number 1? I've talked about it so good and it has most of my favorite songs on there. Why isn't it number 1? Well, that's because there was one album that Imagine Dragons released right after Night Visions that to me was just so complete and showed how far they can go without losing who they are. And that goes with my number 1 pick, which is Smoke and Mirrors. Smoke and Mirrors, man. It's so musically complex and it's got so many interesting ideas. They innovated so much with their sound, but they didn't lose who they are, which was awesome. The album kind of goes from grunge rock to like soft alternative, which is a nice little balance they managed to have. And it has some really interesting ideas. And it kind of deals with one big theme of kind of questioning yourself and everything you believe, like if it's true or not. But it's different categories of that. So it's like, is what I think about love true? Is what I think about my faith true? Is what I think about who I am as a person true? And it kind of deals with all that, and Dan's able to really convey that with his voice in this album. Songs like Smoke and Mirrors, The Fall, Thief, Shots, so there's so many good ones. They're so emotional, and I feel like this album just kind of came from a place that Dan was feeling at the time, and it shows. And overall, honestly, I feel like the reason why it's number 1 is it's just more cohesive as an album. Like, if you just listen to it from beginning to end, it feels right. It feels like everything's in order and in place. I feel like the only thing holding Night Visions back was that it was so different, which isn't a bad thing, but it wasn't as cohesive as Smoke and Mirrors. So that's why I think Smoke and Mirrors deserves #1. So yeah, that was the video today, guys. That was my ranking of all 4 Imagine Dragons albums. So what was your favorite Imagine Dragons album? Tell me down below in the comments. I want to know, guys. And as always, if you like this video and you want to see more like this video, you can click right here after I disappear.